What's up guys, it's Johnny Candido of Candido Training HQ, and today's video is one that a lot of people have been asking me about, and that is how I got over my back injury, which occurred about a year ago. So before I begin, two very critical things I need to get out of the way is one, when I say I got over, I mean in terms of predictability and in terms of being able to do everything I want to do. There still isn't a day where I don't think about it just to make sure I don't accidentally flare something up, so it still is on my mind. And also the second point is in terms of the scope of this video, this is from a powerlifter's perspective. It's from my perspective too. So it's not anything really beyond that. It's just some ideas to where if you maybe have something similar, then you can kind of pull from it. But other than that, do not take this as a recommendation that's medical or anything that replaces, for example, a physical therapist giving you advice. Obviously, those fields are there for a reason. They're professionals for a reason. So go to them for anything that's debatable or any evidence that you have that's contrary to what I'm saying. So with that out of the way, I'm gonna take this really from the top, and I'm gonna go over what worked and what didn't work, especially just so it's not too generic and it's not just everything that you kind of already know. So first of all, I know there's a big debate after the injury. There's a big debate after you hurt yourself if you should be active or if you should just try to rest as much as possible, take time away from the gym. So what really changed my perspective massively is watching Chad Wesley Smith or listening to him on a podcast, and then also watching Chris Duffin. So I'll link both of those in the description below. Personally, the Chad Smith one with Max Aita I thought was by far the most useful because it's the longest. So a lot of times when you're hurt, it's almost easy to just get in the wrong mentality, and someone can say, oh, you should still be training or you should still look forward to the gym and try to get in what you can. But sometimes if you don't hear a long conversation about it, it doesn't really resonate with you the same way. So I like how it's 40 plus minutes of them going over what to do, or examples of them getting over injuries or athletes they train. So for myself, what really worked the best was going into the gym and doing sumo deadlifts for 4 to 5 sets and usually of 10 to 12 reps. So I believe what I did initially was 4 sets of 12, 5 days a week with 135 pounds. So what's incredible is before that, I tried full just rest, and it was literally the worst time I've ever had injury-wise, where with my back, it was slight, constant pain, truly 24/7. So waking up with pain, going to bed with pain, waking up with pain. It was like that only for 2 to 3 days until I changed something. So what's funny about that is I didn't even have that level of pain immediately after the injury. It wasn't that severe. It just, as I've said in other videos, it just never went away. And the thing that made it more severe was complete rest, which I did about 2 weeks after it. So the first 2 weeks weren't that bad. Complete rest made it really pretty much close to unbearable. And then right after that, when I started sumo deadlifting every single day, for at least days of the week, not counting the weekend, every single time that just made it better, and it made it better immediately. So I mean on the second day, I knew, okay, we're totally in the clear in terms of any type of pressing pain. So in a way, I think it contradicts a lot of approaches in that some people kind of try to avoid powerlifting movements, say, okay, that happened because you're overloading those movements. And to some extent that's true. I hurt myself squatting, so I didn't squat right away. And I think that was a good decision. But at the same time, I think you also have to look at what we're conditioned to do. So if I started walking right away, I don't think that would have been as effective as starting with the sumo. Or even starting with, for example, a partial pull. Just doing whatever range of motion you can and then building up work capacity with that. I think that is more effective than trying to build up this very generic base, general abilities in, let's say, walking, different forms of cardio like swimming. Those might be good ideas, but I think that it's still best to start with what you know you're competent in, so it's not a totally new stimulus that you're not conditioned for. And then afterwards, that's when, in my opinion, walking is amazingly helpful. That was probably the biggest second step that I took. So the person who inspired me to walk every day was Stuart McGill. I like how he said in a video of his, which I'll also link below, he said that if you don't walk every day, that you deserve your back pain. So I found that pretty funny how aggressive he is. And I also like how he gave a great example, if you're feeling bad for yourself, about how he had a client who was not able to even walk for 15 minutes. So walking for me, for example, was never an issue. But his client wasn't able to walk for 15 minutes. And then what he would do is have them walk for just as long as they can. So even if it's just 3 minutes, then have him sit down or do whatever he needs to do to rest, and then still go another 3 minutes until it's 15 minutes in totality, and then gradually work to being able to walk it in one run. So I thought that was really inspiring because it's very easy to just feel bad for yourself being in this constant situation where it randomly pops up even though you think you're over it. Whereas hearing that people have it that bad and then he's still pushing for doing something about it, even if you could just feel pity for yourself at that point. That to me was definitely something that resonated with me. Of course, if we're going to mention McGill, we have to mention the big three. In conjunction with the sumo deadlifts 5 times a week, the McGill big three was one of the first things I did also. And the side plank specifically to my left side, so my issue might be QL or abductor. It's around the glute and the QL area. To the left side, it certainly helped me the most. And it still does help me the most to this day. So I know that's the source of my problems. And that's right around the area where I felt that initial injury. By the way, a lot of people have been asking me about his books, which ones I recommend. And I got to be honest, I've not bought any of his books. So I certainly do recommend looking into them. I'm sure they're great. But to be completely honest, I've just looked at his free content and his videos. He doesn't have that many videos, but between videos and articles, there's a decent amount of information you can find out. So speaking on that, a free ebook, which I could not recommend any stronger, is Greg Lemon's book on pain. So he has a free ebook on pain, and all you do is just enter in your email address. And I've downloaded this. There's nothing really shady about it. There's no loops you have to go through. You just put the email address and it's very easy to download right away. So I'll have that be the first link in the description because it is a phenomenal read. And it's just basically going over the disconnection between mechanistic reasoning and sometimes how pain doesn't really follow that as clearly as we think. So that is an important disclaimer, is that a lot of people still ask me about if I ever got an MRI, and the answer is no. I've never gotten an MRI. I've never paid for anything. That's partially just how I am. I try not to pay for anything that I don't have to. My parents are exactly the same way. So when it comes to MRIs and going to professionals, you really have to ask yourself, what are you there for? If you're going to get an MRI, in my opinion, if you know you're not going to get surgery, I highly doubt you're going to find that it's worth your money. Now, if you do plan on getting surgery potentially, you should have something so wrong with you that you already know it. For example, if it's affecting daily functioning, constant pain, or bladder function, things like that. I think really if you haven't had an external force hit you, like a car crash or a horseback ride fall, it's going to be pretty unlikely. Not impossible, but pretty unlikely if it's just training related that you're going to want to actually try to get back surgery. Because of course lately there's been tons of information that you can look up on the amount of people who have MRI results that are abnormal but they're asymptomatic. So even with younger people in their 20s, it's 20+% of people who have something wrong with their discs that appears on imaging without any pain whatsoever. If it's not causing pain, then it's not an issue. There's no reason to then go in and try to fix something that isn't really a problem in the first place. Be very cautious of anyone who gives you an old school simplistic explanation on back pain. So for example, if someone says your hamstrings need to be stretched, or they say that your hip flexors are pulling your pelvis into anterior pelvic tilt, and that's what's causing the back pain, just due to misalignment, which they don't even know if that's an unhealthy range of motion for you in the first place. That is definitely a clear-cut sign that that person might not be someone to listen to if they're saying that based on that information alone. Pain is just definitely too complex from what I've seen and from the people I follow who really are deep into the evidence, like Andrew Vygotsky and Greg Lemon. Okay, so those things initially made it to where I felt nearly 100%. It put me in the proper mindset, and my body actually, there were times where I was completely pain-free for, let's say, 5 days, just a month after the injury. Yet it still lingered on, and it would come back and then become a problem again. What my problem is hearing that pain is incredibly complex and not necessarily a reflection of physical symptoms. it led me to be a little bit too open-minded in a sense, where a lot of times I would expand on the movements rather than just sticking to the movements that worked and expanded on the duration of those movements, or even lack of movement, just isometric. So that's my my point here, is to expand. If you find something that's useful, to stick with that and just do more of it rather than trying to just expand what you can do in totality right away. So for example, let's go with the McGill Big Three. So on the left side, I said it made me, it provided me the most relief doing the isometric hold, whereas my left oblique and I felt a little bit my left abductor. And what I tried to do is I tried to see, okay, can I do a little bit of dynamic range of motion, perhaps a little bit of lateral flexion on that side, on my spine. And it's incredible how much that did not work and how much that just, it didn't clearly set me back, but it certainly wasn't making me feeling better the next day. And the goal in my mind was just, I need to be able to move fully, right? So I need to gradually work up to that. This is unloaded, so I didn't think it was going to be anything that would have a negative effect. It was just standing up. But what I ended up finding is that even then, that can still make you a little bit stiffer the next day. So I would rather, what I switched to is doing, let's say, 20 plus second holds rather than just going with I was initially doing 3 rounds of 10 seconds. Then I went to, okay, let's do 2 sets with 20 second holds. And then I even did 40 second hold at one point. And I'll probably try to build up to a minute on that. And I found that to be extremely effective every time. With walking, for example, outside of also building up to running, I even would go 20 to 25 minutes a day rather than just sticking with 15 minutes. So that type of expansion can help you build up work capacity, can help you get better, and really have a new stimulus to continue to improve, but you're not doing anything that's out of the ordinary. If standing for long periods of time flares up your back more than anything else, then walking longer distances is the best way, in my opinion, to prepare for that. So for my powerlifting meet, that was the biggest issue, was simply standing around before deadlifting. I already knew that it was going to be a bad meet. I almost didn't even do my opener because hours of standing was harder on my body than training a full session. Therefore, in many cases, I think it's better to walk 30 plus minutes than it is to even focus on trying to run. And remember, the most important thing here is predictability. Nothing else is more important in my opinion. After that, of course, eventually you do want to build up your range of motion because you don't want to be paralyzed with fear all the time. So what I ended up doing was Stuart McGill's cat to camel dynamic movement that he recommends, where you're horizontal with the floor so that then gravity doesn't compress your spine while you're doing it. And also what I did was my own twist to it. It was doing spinal rotation going both sides at a time. I found that this was very effective at targeting what was awkward with me, where I'd actually feel a little bit of gristle, a little bit of clicking going on that left side again. And doing that gradually, doing that very slowly so that it doesn't click, and then gradually doing it with a bigger range of motion, a little bit looser, then without clicking also, just waiting for it to be able to handle that smoothly. That really helped me a lot. But again, the main message here is taking things very slowly and not having a picture in your head of what you think is happening mechanistically, and rather going purely off of the pain response that you're getting. So for example, a lot of people have asked me about inversion tables. And inversion tables do not help me. They actually make me feel notably worse every single time. And I know this because I tried a variety of different setups. I tried going less severely. I tried going less time, less inclination, or less harsh angle. And it was never an effective tool for me. So in that case, it's important not to imagine, because we all love to imagine that our spines are just compressed up and then you just pull it apart and all of a sudden everything feels good. Well, if it doesn't feel good, you have to just get that image entirely out of your head. And with myself, I had this image of wanting to build up a little bit of flexibility. Obviously, I know stiffness is good with your spine and stability, but I wanted to build up a little bit of range of motion. So it made me think, okay, well, if I do a little bit of just moving around, a little bit more dynamic lifts, that then I'll be able to do that in my day-to-day tasks better. But ironically, I just feel stiffer the next day, whereas if I did an isometric, then I would feel looser the next day and better. So in those cases, it's more of a mental imaging thing, especially if you're me, if you're like me, if you're a very visual person, you have to get the picture out of your head of what you think is happening mechanistically, because pain is just too complex for that, and it's probably not how it's working. So speaking of inversion tables, I want to talk about some unproven things that I found to work for me. So there's no evidence, from what I've found, there's no strong evidence for inversion tables There's no strong evidence for TENS units to be that effective using electrical pulses. And there's no strong evidence for most supplements other than perhaps ibuprofen. But of course, you don't want to get too stuck on that. Now, for myself, I found the TENS unit actually to be quite effective. So I definitely recommend trying a TENS unit. You can buy one at CVS, and it is pretty cheap. It's like 30 to at most $50. So that is certainly worth a shot. And if you haven't tried it ever, it does go up to a higher intensity than you would expect. So at the very least, you feel like you're getting a genuine shot at something to work. Whereas I know sometimes when you buy gimmicky things, it barely even does anything. You can barely feel it, and then it just feels like it was a ripoff. This, at the very least, is a notable difference. It feels like a massage where it's really pinpointed hard, like taking a hard elbow right to your SI joint. And so at least you can see if it works for you or not. Now, also something that I thought worked for me initially, but it does seem like there's really no evidence for it, so it might be total bro science, is glucosamine and MSM. Now, I'm not alone. The Hodge twins also recommended that. But when I was reading more on it, it seems like the only studies that support it, also they took ibuprofen in conjunction with it. So if you isolate it, it doesn't seem like it works, at least in any study. But for myself, I still take it just because I bought so many that I still have some. And to me, it did correlate for when I got better. So you could, of course, argue very easily that that's entirely placebo. It might be, but it definitely, there was a correlation, at least in terms of the timing of when I took it to when I started feeling significantly better. So I still take it just because I have it. I don't know if I'll actually buy it again. Okay, all of that deals with the first 6 months or so of what was going on in my brain after the injury. And now to get from 6 months to a year where I started picking up momentum to the point where I am now, where I feel like I'm over it in terms of my training, what that took was, first of all, was tracking how I was feeling during the day mentally, and then tracking how I was feeling in terms of my back well-being. And both numbers were out of 10, and then notes on anything that was just notable or any change I made. So for example, if you take 3 ibuprofen and you feel 8.5 out of 10 your back well-being, maybe a 7 out of 10 mental well-being, to write that down so that then you can just keep track of that all. That was really just taking Greg Lemon's book to its logical conclusion, because it's all about the biopsychosocial model and about how different factors can affect how you're feeling, different stress factors all throughout your life. It's pretty unbelievable too, because a lot of times what can happen is that you feel as though you're going nowhere. Because like I said, a month from my injury, I felt pain-free. And then 9 months later, I'll have a day where it's feeling, let's say, a 6 out of 10 on back well-being. That's happened. So what helps is when you have it all written down, then you can look back and make sure that you're not comparing a peak to a valley now, and you can look at what's a little bit more your average. And that really helps. And also taking notes I found to be very important too, because what happens is sometimes you'll rate yourself an 8 out of 10. I actually had this. I had an 8.5 out of 10 on back well-being, and then an end note that I sneezed and I had a little bit of sciatica. So if I had that now, that would be a 6 out of 10 day, because I have never had a sneeze with sciatica in months. I would consider that to be a horrible day. So it's important to have a mix of qualitative and quantitative data at the same time. So to expand on this issue of expectations, something that I found incredibly useful is to look up a lot of forums or look up for people in similar situations to read about someone who fits your profile and has gotten over it. So for example, I remember reading about someone who they said they had a back injury when they were 30. Now they're 35 and they feel better than they did when they were 25, when maybe back issues started. So certain things like that can help you feel better, because a lot of times the perspective on back injuries is just if you have it while you're young, that then it's just going to be even worse while you're older. And a lot of times then you learn about how that's not necessarily the case, and then that can help you become a little bit more optimistic and a little bit more motivated. And then again, of course, since the biopsychosocial model applies here, then if you have bad expectations, then it just makes you feel worse, and then you justify those expectations. Stuart McGill even said that a younger person could hurt their back, and it actually takes longer for arthritis to develop, and arthritis developing is actually good in terms of with discs, because that helps reduce the pain and the sensitivity to it. And I think the best way to think about it is to think that if you were entirely uninjured your whole life and active, sure, I'm sure that's the best possible scenario. But if you were active and injured, but then you stay active afterwards, I'm sure that's probably a lot better than if you were inactive and never injured, or if you were active, injured, and then stopped. So I think a lot of people who have those like high school football stories about these injuries never healing, a lot of times it's just because they're middle-aged men that drink beer now and they don't do anything now. So as long as you stay active, you can usually find a solution. At least that's what I've been reading, and that's what I've been experiencing myself. And then when it comes to athlete expectations, something that is an incredibly useful source that I actually didn't have because it just started is Bryce Lewis's athlete group page. So it's called, let me look it up here. It's called Athletes with Injuries, a support group. I'll link it in the description. And basically it's everybody writing on the wall about their injury, their experience getting over their injury, or their experience still going through it. And it helps you just feel like you're not alone because a lot of people have injuries, but obviously not a lot of people want to talk about it. All right, I want to end this with the part that's within my scope the best, and that is programming. So what has been the most useful programming-wise are a few things. First, by far the most useful thing was to have a top set and then a dramatic difference between the top set and back off work. So a lot of people assume that when you have an injury, you should just go light in general. And while that can be the case, after a while, if you're doing 3 sets of 10, even if it's lighter, sometimes just that third set is quite hard. And then you just feel, you may get a back pump or something. You just feel kind of bad. And then you really don't know where to go because it's so light, yet you can't add weight. What I found for myself is, for example, I did a double pause deadlift with 500 pounds for a set of 5. And then I did, I think it was 3 sets of 5 after that with 405. And both of those were about equal difficulty. So for myself, it really was the endurance that got shot by far the first. And by just giving myself a huge difference, that helped me get amped up for that top set. My back felt fine, but then not tweak my back when I'm a little bit less focused, just putting in that volume work. That was a total game changer for me. Secondly, what helped with programming was to go with high reps, but for lifts that you are not gonna compete in. So with where loading isn't as important. So then you can do things like deficit deadlifts for 315 for 15 reps is what I did beltless, and then I did conventional for 315 for 20 reps. I found that doing, especially when you're doing 1 or 2 top sets, that it's very easy to tolerate. In that mid set, you can feel out how it's going. Whereas if you go too heavy, what I did right away, actually within the first month or so of my injury, I tried to go heavier on deficit deadlifts because I thought I could just get stronger and then I'd be over the injury. But that wasn't the case. And it just made things worse because then I was tentative going into the first rep with 405. Whereas if you do 315 and you're just cranking out reps, by the 12th rep, you can really know if you're going to be good or not. And then if you have to ditch the set, that's no big deal. I find the progression is a lot more predictable because, for example, if you do 365 pounds for 6 reps for 2 sets, then you can know how that felt going into doing 365 for 12 reps. Lastly, the mistake I see very often when it comes to people with injuries is it's easy to contextualize everything into what you're used to doing. So for example, if you're running the cube method, it's easy once you come back from injury to basically take the cube method and go, okay, I'll just do more dynamic days, or I'll tweak it this way, and you're still doing a format similar to it. Whereas to me, what helped the most is when I dropped all of that. I'm used to using variation for the deadlift. I wish initially I just stuck with the sumo. I did not do sumo double pause or deficit deadlifts, didn't try any of that. I wish I kept it far simpler and reprogrammed everything from scratch without having any type of format to go off of. Now what I did a good job of is I eventually dropped the squat entirely because that was not making me feel good. So if a lift just is not working with your body, there's nothing wrong with taking time off of it. Of course, it will have a serious training effect, but I think it's also important to recognize that you can be strong and still not be healthy and pain-free. Like I said, I did deficit deadlifts fairly heavy for me very shortly after my injury, and it did not make things better at all. And I was stronger back-wise there than I was, let's say, maybe 8 months in. I'd say now I'm probably building up to where my back strength is at that level, if not stronger. But that took me a long time to do that with actually not having pain. Also, a lot of people regress into the same goal setting expectations that caused the injuries in the first place. So for example, with myself, a 700-pound deadlift and trying to total near someone like Taylor Atwood, for example, at Raw Nationals, so my squat, I had a certain expectation. That really did probably cause it, where if I was not competing against anybody, if I wasn't near a 700-pound deadlift, would I have been in that position? Probably not. So it's something where I have to take a step back and say, okay, I'm still a competitive person. I want to do as well as I can. But right now, if you mention a 700-pound deadlift, I don't care about it. What I care about is hitting smaller goals first and then I'll save that for once I hit a certain amount of training cycles fully healthy. That leads me to my ultimate conclusion here, which is that in my opinion, looking at it in terms of training cycles healthy is by far more useful than looking at it in terms of time healthy. So what I mean by that is that anybody can squat 3 sets of 10 at 50% or less and then go weeks and weeks and months while not having an injury. But if you add weight to the bar, if you try to peak, or for myself, what happened is that actually deloading caused more issues because I wasn't moving enough. If that gives you problems, then that still can lurk once you do eventually try to peak. So in my opinion, what helps is to actually have a lot of 3 to 6 week cycles where you have smaller goals and then just get through those cycles without any incidents. That is way more useful because then you can keep building on that, and then you can look at a certain percentage of training cycles you've had without any flare-ups. So for myself, I've gone 4+ training cycles with 0 flare-ups, or at least 0 significant flare-ups. And I've had days where I just randomly feel slightly off, but I haven't had a day where I pull a deadlift and I feel like I tweak something. That just hasn't happened at all. So that mentality has been what's really taken me to this next level. Whereas if I just thought about in terms of time, I never would have really gotten over the hump because, as I said, I'm a year in and I still feel some discomfort at some times. I still can't just do any type of dynamic spinal rotation without any issue. If I could go back in time, I wish I tracked the percentage of training cycles that did have injuries, because had I done that, I certainly would have ended the last one where I did hurt myself for that final time. I would have ended that way more conservatively because it really did become a trend where with back injuries, of course, a lot of times it's a certain accumulation of injuries, and I think I hurt myself. I mean, I probably had some incidents, like 2 out of the last 4 training cycles, if you count the one where I ultimately got hurt. So the way you should look at it is if in the last 6 training cycles, if you had 2, that's too many injuries right there. Something has to change going into that 7th training cycle. I think it's really addictive to get into that bipolar, really low moment where you're really hurt, then you're on this dramatic comeback, then you're going all out, you're trying to set PRs and everything, and then people are super shocked, and everybody loves a dramatic story. But if you want to be great, in my opinion, you have to be boring, where it has to be just constantly building, to where then you're at that low point, and instead of going straight to the top, you just go right to the middle. And that's all you need, and then you need another 6 months in the middle, or another 10 training cycles in the middle, where you're slightly higher. You know what's crazy is I actually deadlifted 635 with the deadlift bar for 3 reps before that meet where I missed the 635 for 1, because on my good day, I was that good. And that was gripping at the start of the knurling too, without being max width. So not a cheap cheating style kind of that I tried to switch to. But the problem was there just wasn't that consistency. So that's the product of going after those big goals, is you could shoot for the stars, then you end up, you're not even consistently healthy week to week and you get nothing. So that's it, guys. Hopefully this was helpful, sharing my experience. Now, since we have so many people, and this is a topic where I think the more people you hear from, the better, please comment below if you've had a similar situation, what you did, what you went through, and perhaps your age, some details like that. And let me know, because I definitely want to read them, and I think it'd be very useful for other people to hear similar circumstances to their own. So that's it, guys. Make sure to like the video, support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already. And thanks for watching, guys. Peace.
Man, fuck a shooting star. Biggie died, they shot a star. Who you know in West LA? Bring that ruckus to MA. Jeez.
And that was really just kind of taking Greg Lemon's book to its logical conclusion.